So, why does A Score to Settle end this way? Back in the late 2021, a little show called Arcane came out. Consensus is that it's a pretty good show. It won all the awards, it has all the ratings, it birthed all the reacts, and 'twas not necessarily what I expected. Did I stood corrected? Happy upon video stumbling to my swole jocks, modest cuts, and Yodo roleplay enthusiasts, I am the gay autistic Mormon Marine, and for however long this takes, we're gonna talk about, all of Arcane. Cause everybody wants to be my enemy. So, what is an Arcane? Well, it's a lot of things. It's a 2D, 3D action anime Netflix series that I'm 89% sure you've seen, based on a video game that I'm 57% sure you have played. It's an extended version of the origin trailers that game's been pumping out for its characters over the last decade. It's part of an evil media conglomerate's shallow efforts to expand one of their IPs into fresh, new, lucrative markets. It's either getting a second season in the near future or got it 20 years ago and I'm finally getting around to bitching about it. And it is, in fact, kinda good. Womp womp. And yeah, I'm saying this to leverage my sincere endorsement that I do, in fact, like Arcane. But at the moment I'm making this, Arcane has been out for time, and there's a million YouTube videos gushing over how great it is, understandably. Trying to create a concise generalization of Arcane feels impossible because it has so many facets. Its visual art, its music score, its adaptation, its respect and enrichment to lore despite not being canon, its compelling narratives and metaphor, its allegory of important social issues, even its overarching themes of family, ideals, violence, and power. Arcane is an endeavor of fine craftsmanship, and in many ways, it succeeds. And I want to be cautious as I bring up the larger opinion on Arcane, as it's really not the point. I don't want anyone to think that my criticism is coming from a place of contrarian clickbait, gleeful malice, or vindictive screeching that things didn't go the way I'd have liked them to. Many people love this show, and I don't want to take that from anyone. Hell, I want to revel in this show as much as the next fanboy. But I do find it really odd that even after all this time, there really hasn't been that much in the way of any real criticism, and what criticism I have found tends to miss the mark. So, I want to be careful as I posit that Arcane is not that good. Some of it is even quite bad. Cause everybody wants to be my enemy. r/hashtag unpopular opinions. A little while ago I made a video about Riot's teaser for Arcane, A Score to Settle, and while I'm glad that most of my worst predictions didn't come to pass and the story was significantly better than I anticipated, I feel the spirit of the video wound up being accurate. My principal critique of A Score to Settle was that it was nigh perfect, drawing up myriad complex topics, feelings, and themes, all wrapped in some of the most beautiful animation I had ever seen, only for the last 10 seconds of it to end jarringly, and that sent me down a rabbit hole of concerns lined with red flags. Likewise, Arcane the show treats you to whole episodes and arcs that start nigh perfect, but as the series progresses, it loses focus, settling for improper resolutions or outright abandoning some of its most intriguing questions, in favor of following too closely to what ironically becomes its weakest device, the relationship between Vi and Jinx. To reiterate, I did not go into Arcane wanting to hate it, and I was more than pleasantly surprised with how good it was. I've seen it a dozen times now, half the time sharing it with friends, and the other half the time I'm trying to understand why, despite all the moments I absolutely love, the characters that I'm still attached to, the narrative epiphanies I'm still having, all the intense emotions that still get me, even now, every time, why do I come away disappointed? What's the problem with Arcane? Well, to understand that, we need to start with its origins. Arcane is and is the way it is because of coalescing developments in retcons, cinematics, and even music of the source Arcane's adapting. And so, even though no, it's not canon, and no, you don't need to know the lore to enjoy it, yes, we do need to talk about that degenerate, scum-diving digital hellspace Arcane is based on. The League of Legends. League of Legends came into being in October of 2009 as a free-to-play multiplayer online battle arena. It's got millions of active players, has esports prize pools in the millions, and is infamous for a toxic player base. League gameplay can be summed up as 2 teams of 5 of the worst people you know digitally LARPing a mashup of Capture the Flag and Battle Royale. But none of that is actually important right now, mister. What's important is that at the start of the match you choose one of 168 and counting champions, each with its own unique design, abilities, and most importantly, connections to an intricate web of consistently growing and changing lore. Backgrounds, short stories, artwork, and that's before we bring in alternate universes, selling the cosmetics or skins of which is the primary way it makes its money. Riot, League's parent company, has always had a business model that involved the perpetual updating of its game, both the actual play and the story. Riot's logic was that in order to keep the game growing, it had to keep from becoming stale. On the play side of this, that meant balance patches, adding new characters, and an annual update that's had varying scope and impact. On the story side, however, things have changed drastically from Riot's original vision. League of Legends' story originally was all politics with a thin veneer of tropes slapped over it. Literally.
It was really fun to be able to come up with those characters. We actually ended up being able to characterize the style we wanted to be in as basically pop fantasy, which is archetypes you know from fantasy, twisted in a way that brought them to life kind of in the modern day.
The original story went like this. Due to the escalating apocalyptic destruction of warring mages, the powers that be organized pseudo-gladiatorial slap fights to settle disputes by proxy. This League of Legends was filled with tropes disguised as champions from across the universe, most joining willingly either to represent their nations, their causes, or themselves, but ultimately controlled in these matches by various summoners, the players, puppeted into killing each other and reanimating ad nauseum over and over again to settle international grievances involving everything from colonialism bad to trade disputes. Pew pew. In tandem with Riot's game balance updates, there were story updates via the in-game newspaper, The Journals of Justice, which kept players up to speed on faction conflicts, foreshadowing themes for major events, and providing context to the alternate reality skins that were selling at the time. This personally invested the player into League's universe. I think that the original business model envisioned the player unfolding their laptop to read the late afternoon news, sipping on a mug of warm Mountain Dew as they read that some of the barbarian Viking royals are getting married and sapient crystal megascorpions are raising alarm that they're being genocided for being literally made out of resources. But the lure of this wasn't the excitement of consistent change and development, but that it made you feel like you were a part of League. You weren't just playing a game, each match you were actively participating in League's world. You were settling these disputes, shaping this story. But after a few years, Riot wanted to adjust its story to a more dramatic and serious tone. Its characters and narratives were heavily constrained by this League of Legends concept, as every champion's biography had to have an initiation into that League institution shoehorned into it. This resulted in a vast but shallow lore. The early roster of champs was all linear tropes, sometimes with a twist. Frost Archer, Minotaur but good guy, Big Sword Barbarian but good guy, Big Sword Knight guy, Sarah Angel, Big Titty Goth Angel, Pirate, Big Titty Softcore Pirate.
How do you like my guns? Shock and
The factions likewise constrained with motivations that had to be expressed through the machinations of the League, and the journals that reported on them were even more one-dimensional. Official good guys, official bad guys, a wretched hive of scum and villainy, Pan-Asia, steampunk, bad guys steampunk, cat hobbits, thankfully not big titty, female cat hobbits. Sorry to my Yordle roleplay enthusiasts.
We kind of felt like we needed a premise for the world that explained who the characters were and why they were there. And I think in retrospect, that was constraining and it was kind of a mistake.
And so Riot started a massive lore overhaul. Writers like Alex Yeet would start writing the backgrounds of new, at the time, characters like Lulu or Victor without referencing the League. Eventually, by the time 2014 rolled around, Riot retconned the League of Legends out of existence entirely. Yeet! They also shut down the forums, and by 2020 nuked them so hard, it's difficult to even find archives of them. Which is very frustrating as a researcher, by the way. Probably the right move, but I feel it was more in spite of people like me researching the bad than the actual bad itself. Less yeet and more piercing light of the seven. Bum 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 bum. Arcane's depth and scope is owed to this transitionary period. Characters like Vi and Jinx are designed as exceptionally as they are because they came into being as resources were freed from those old journals of justice narrative constraints, themselves replaced with secondary short stories that complemented characters' already more fleshed out narrative backgrounds. And Riot was shifting from players' participation being the impetus for their support to relying entirely on them falling in love with the characters and lore. And, this is important, League's story has not necessarily finished retconning even now. Arcane, despite not being canon, nevertheless actively retconned champions and their factions. You don't need to know League's lore to enjoy Arcane, but Arcane is influencing League, and so Arcane is being affected by choices with that in mind. In the same way that Arcane owes its narrative style to League's retcon era and the artistry that's evolved from it, Arcane owes its compelling visual style to League's evolving cinematics. Originally, the aesthetic was pretty stereotypical for a fighting game, focused on rule of cool action and assumptions about what best keeps a teenage boy's attention span. Over the years, though, Riot began to shift that focus more towards the sentimental and dramatic. Riot realized even the most lackluster characters could get an influx of attention and affection with just a few minutes of screen time set to epic music. And that, in turn, was enough to enmesh players into Riot's product. As players were no longer simulating the direction of League's story, Riot instead depicted the story of the players themselves. Cinematics kicking off the esports World's Championships often featured both in-game characters and players living through them. In 2014, Riot commissioned the band Imagine Dragons to make the song Warriors, and they also tapped Fortiche Productions to animate it. Fortiche Productions, which uses a blend of 2D and 3D animation styles to bring out the best of both worlds, perfectly captured that League experience, depicting both the fantasy of ascending through League's ranked ladders to emerge as one of esports' elite athletes, as well as the reality that most of us experience actually playing the game. I swear, guys, I'm having fun! Speaking of Warriors, League's discography is one of Riot's greatest successes. Music is one of the areas League's community doesn't devolve into a flaming cesspit of toxicity. In fact, it's almost universally revered. What started as simple theme songs to play in the background to a champion's reveal portrait has culminated into entire albums, including the works of alternate universe versions of in-game characters and collaborations with real-world artists like Zed, G-Idol, G-Idol, Idol. Apparently it's pronounced idol. Apparently you do not pronounce the G in G-Idol, in idol. Fake fan. I'm not a scholar. I just have a bachelor's degree. And again, Imagine Dragons. And now Linkin Park, apparently? Spawning in my skins, these noobs, they will not peel. Christian Linke, Riot's lead composer, is responsible for some, if not all, of League's most iconic themes, including those for Arcane's central characters, Vi and Jinx, the latter getting her own music video, which Fortiche Productions just so happened to animate. While Fortiche was working on projects like Seconds, Echo's cinematic teaser, Linke was studying the way of the blade. I mean, working on projects like The Curse of the Sad Mummy, which he actually sang. Both are emotionally charged, powerful pieces, especially in comparison to the more action-packed Gynaxing in League's videos of yore. Fortiche and Linke would share work again with League's unveiling of the KDA skinline and their title song Pop Stars, one of League's most successful projects. Even though League of Legends lore had been going through constant upheaval with whole region retcons regularly, along with a noticeable change in management, the collective effort of these artists succeeded in building players' investment into its lore to the point it was almost cliché for Reddit or YouTube posts to comment on how it desperately needed a TV adaptation. And then, the announcement dropped. The first announcement of Arcane was made in 2019 and started with a montage of Fortiche Productions' iconic work for League thus far before teasing beautiful, finished quality renders of the show. Riot was making it clear why Fortiche had been tapped for Arcane's animation. Likewise, Riot tapped Christian Linke to be one of its 2 main showrunners. Alexi is here too.
You all still have Zoidberg.
Although Linke's musical background would obviously contribute to the breadth of Arcane's soundtrack, including the return of Imagine Dragons for the title song Enemy, Linke's work generating champion themes, focused on reflecting each character's core essence, made him an excellent pick to keep Arcane's character and world authentic. Alex Yee, too, was a natural pick for this production. It makes sense he would be chosen as a showrunner in duo with Linke, as he worked on the narrative for at least 2 of Arcane's secondary characters, Caitlyn and Victor, and was actively involved in the unveiling of characters meant to start fleshing out League's universe, just as Arcane continues to do. There was a lot of picking on him that I dropped over the course of making this. Suffice to say, fuck him and his beautiful hairline. Okay, it's out of my system, I can move on. Arcane is, and is the way it is, directly because of this historical context.
I remember even then Christian, kind of like hunting around on the internet, finding all these different animation styles, right? And looking at this one, very small company in Paris that he just had a really good feeling about. That was the first time that we worked with Fortiche.
Riot brought together some of the most critically influential people that shaped what League of Legends is to make it. It is a culmination of talent, art, lore, and passion that made people think League would make a great TV adaptation in the first place. And with Arcane's very first scene, it shows. In Arcane's opening with the bridge, Fortiche takes League's traditional blur of Marvel and theatrics to its max, using Dutch angles, violent jump cuts, and tearful shadows to convey a mix of horror and sorrow. Arcane, at its core, is a tragedy, and it wastes no time establishing this undertone. Nor does it waste time establishing Arcane's themes, as a young girl's voice sings a rhyme also called The Bridge. At first glance, a waifish girl's voice singing a poem reinforces that dark tone. It conveys horror a la 28 Days Later, or sorrow a la anytime someone sings Amazing Grace at a funeral. But the bridge is more than just a haunting tone setter. It's Arcane's thesis statement. And for our purposes, to distinguish it from both the bridge and the actual poem title, we're going to refer to it as Dear Friend Across the River. This poem is diegetically about the setting's 2 cities, Piltover and Zaun, which are separated by the Pilt River and 90-degree angles. Over the course of League's evolving story, these 2 cities have transformed from good guy steampunk, bad guy steampunk to instead represent divergent ideas of capitalism. Piltover is the idealist take, the American dream, a place of wealth, innovation, and opportunity. Zaun is the cynic's take, the laissez-faire nightmare, a place of squalor, exploitation, and opportunism. Yes, I know my French is horrible. Fuck French. Fuck the French. And fuck you. The twist, or the point, is that they are, in fact, not divergent ideas of capitalism at all. Piltover and Zaun are, for all practical purposes, one place. Both sides of capitalism exist simultaneously as 2 sides of the same coin. At the time of Arcane, the 2 cities are officially joined as the single city-state of Piltover, as whatever Zaun was has been sublimated into Piltover's Undercity via mutual protection pacts. Officially, they, together, are the City of Progress, a place where anyone can rise to success and the streets are paved with gold or whatever. But that is only a reality for the people at the literal top. The lower half of the city is a place of severe poverty, pollution, and struggle. They're exploited for everything from their resources and labor extracting them to the image of them as a political entity, both inclusively through appeals of unity and antagonistically as a dangerous other. The lyrics of The Bridge are from the voice of a Zaunite speaking to a Pilty. She's asking for charity but also being charitable, inviting the Pilty to visit her side of the river, her side of the world, her side of the coin. And it's sung on the literal bridge that connects the 2 across said river, while the visuals contrast that idealistic rhyme with cynical reality. Something between a riot and a rebellion has taken place here, led by Vander, who, we will learn, had a dream of Zaunite independence. The bridge's voice asks for a penny, as a Zaunite is gunned down by an enforcer, who then coup de grace them as the voice says, "What is given will portend the future." As the poem's voice is magnanimous, the visual presents the Zonite rabble as desperate revolters, and the enforcers as cruel defenders, apathetic to their slaughter. The rhyme contrasts Piltover's mighty towers with Zon's homes of stone. Piltover is a place of lofty ideals, while Zon is a place of entrenched community. But in practice, this is what people commit violence for, kill and die for, family and principle.
Where The Bridge is a child's rhyme about connection between people separated by identity and class, Dear Friend Across the River is about power. What people do with it when they have it, and what people will do for it when they don't. The contrast of parallels between them is the lattice Arcane uses to discuss its themes via its characters. Dear Friend Across the River and Arcane are about the confluence of oppression and revolution. It's a story about social violence begetting actual violence, perpetuating each other in that age-old cycle. It's a story of inevitable conflict and suffering, and their consequences, as those that have resources, wealth, and power use those things to retain them, instead of helping those without, forcing a pointless, self-defeating fight for survival engineered by indifference, ignorance, and greed.
This is the class warfare number of the hit Broadway show, Capitalism Bad, the musical! 'Cause everybody wants to be my enemy. Hashtag topical. As the bridge ends, notably before its last words are uttered, we're introduced to the main characters proper, Vi and Jinx, or by their given names, Violet and Powder. Squiggly lines of horror have been subtly building up in the visuals thus far, but here is where we get a good lingering take where the horror squiggles trace the faces of the dead. This is the setup of a device that Arcane uses to communicate Jinx's eventual, for lack of a better word, psychosis, but it's also communicating something else here. The frame turns to reveal Powder, who has her eyes covered by one hand, while Violet holds the other. We infer that Violet is the stronger, older sister, bravely guiding the two through the carnage, while Powder is the younger, who needs to be guided and her innocence protected. We can imagine that Violet has told Powder to do this. Don't look, Powder. Close your eyes. Sing a song.
Just look at the flowers, Lizzie.
But the thing is, Powder does see. The horror squiggles tell us so.
And in turn, that tells us a lot about these girls and their eventual dynamics.
It's understandable that Violet wants to protect Powder from the unsettling sights, but it also tells us how Violet thinks of Powder, the intuitive assumption that Powder cannot or should not handle the brutal world, and so Violet needs to protect Powder, but that protection comes in the form of self-inflicted blindness.
But it doesn't work. Violet doesn't protect Powder. Powder is exposed from the start, and when the girls discover the eventual fate of their parents, it's Violet who breaks down while Powder comforts her. It's an interesting foreshadowing of their two greatest internal conflicts and how they inherently feed into each other. Vi's idealized infantilization of Jinx blinds her to who Powder really is and isolates both of them from the difficult truths of the world they'll have to face. Jinx's resilience is a strength, but she's actively crippled by people who are supposed to be her closest support, problematizing her reactions to violence with noble ideas of who she's supposed to be. And these tie into Arcane's greater themes: impotent noble ideals and their catastrophic failures, broken social foundations and their perpetual cycles of harm, both engendered by the environment of a corrupt society and the sins of their forebears. Dear Friend Across the River is an incredible setup for the paradigm of contrasting parallels that the series uses to discuss its themes, starting with its primary device, Vi and Jinx. Two sisters from the wrong side of the tracks coming from the same trauma, who wind up diverging into completely different outcomes represented by their opposing sides of the river. It's deep, it's poignant, and it lets you know right off the bat that Arcane wants it and what it has to say to be taken seriously. But
let's talk themes. What does Arcane do with its themes? What are Arcane's themes? What are themes? What are words? Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines theme as:
imagine, it's 2024. You're staring at a blank Word document. Words that you've been holding on the tip of your tongue for years, finally, ready to be spilt. But as your fingers prime against the keyboard, tingling gingerly with the thoughts ready to unleash, nothing flows.
Did I stood corrected? Anyways, this is the part of the video where things get hard for me. On the one hand, I am not done fanboying, and I can and will continue doing this for hours on end, if not stopped. Seriously, the first several drafts I did of this script stalled here because I couldn't help but do a deep dish pizza freezer burn dive on every little detail in the first couple of episodes.
See, this cupcake here represents the plight of the proletariat. Notice the dear friend across the river is being ameliorated in the background.
Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines amelioration as
underground, united as one. The nation of song.
Anyways, and on the other hand, I am... What were we talking about? I actually really sympathize with those who've tried to criticize Arcane, the ones who seemed sincere anyways. There is a lot to Arcane, and there's a pressure to be brief and succinct when what's wrong is complex and explaining it is complicated. They tend to reduce it down to more general issues, pacing, dialogue, that sort of thing, when it's much more the causes of those issues, which are more thematic and metatextual.
So I'm going to go into detail about the first arc, episodes 1 to 3, both because it better illustrates how Arcane's problems manifest, and because I really want to.
Because that's me! Arcane's overarching theme, Dear Friend Across the River, is about opposing sides, cycles of violence, and questions about the use of power in pursuit of change. Each individual episode also has its own theme, stated explicitly, as in actually spoken, by the episode title. Those themes themselves interplay between moral and narrative elements. Episode 6, When These Walls Come Tumbling Down, is about the way oppressive methods of control, even when good-intentioned, often just make things more chaotic. Literally, the erection of walls to protect the city is what causes its fall into disorder. While some of these titles are better than others,
The boy savior.
most feature fun wordplay and the duality of their narrative and moral themes, especially in the first arc, and getting distracted by gushing about how cool and great that all is very easy. You've been warned. Episode 1, Welcome to the Playground, starts with the bridge as its opening, and the next scene continues to be about that dear friend across the river overarching theme. The kids from Zahn's Underground, the lowest and poorest part of the city, use Piltover's verticality to rob a penthouse by parkouring the rooftops over everyone.
It's nice getting above it all, huh?
The kids contextualize the difference between the topside and the undercity in those socio-economic class warfare terms. Piltover is saturated in luxury. Even their balconies are littered with lounging chairs and cupcakes, while these kids are scavenging whatever food they can find.
There's this line that illustrates one of the dimensions of that dear friend overarching theme pretty nicely.
How can anyone have so much stuff?
Simple. Just get born lucky.
What separates these kids from their counterparts across the river? What kind of lives would they have had if they had been born here instead?
Piltover's saturation isn't limited to material things like stuff and food. It's things like the concept of safety itself.
There's tons of enforcers down there.
So much so that the Pilties seem to act entitled to it. No bystanders try to help the enforcers catch the kids when the heist goes wrong. They observe the service that's provided to them doing its thing and go about their business trying to stay out of the way. This is in contrast to what happens when the kids make it to their side of the river.
You know, in my experience, trouble finds you.
Not only is there no public service they could rely on, but they are actively in danger from their fellow Zahnites. See, it's really easy to fall into this, hyper-analyzing every little detail because Arcane, at this point in the story, is so thought out and detailed. It's those freaking cupcakes, man, the frickin' cupcakes that you thought were a reference to Caitlyn's in-game ability, Yordle Snaptrap, but were actually a reference to Capitalism Bad, the musical, all along. Yeah, you redistribute the confection, Clagger, you nearsighted socialist king. Soyuz Nerushimi Respublik Svobodnik. What was I talking about again?
So why the title Welcome to the Playground?
Narratively, it's the appropriate introductory chapter to Arcane's greater overarching theme. It introduces us to the main characters that will be discussing that theme as well as their world. We meet their friends, see what they get up to, and meet their adoptive teen dad Vander.
So at first glance, Welcome to the Playground is a cheeky bow to the audience, which is being welcomed by these fantastic characters into this fantastic setting. But of course, there's more to it than that. In the lyrics of Arcane's thesis statement, the bridge gives us a pretty good primer on what the two sides of the river are.
We raised no mighty towers. Our homes are built of stone.
While the beginning of the episode and the heist scene after it are about this dear friend across the river over Arcane theme, this episode is not.
Remember, Powder never actually finishes singing the bridge. She's cut off before she utters the final words.
That's because Arcane wants to partition that greater overarching theme from the episode's broader purpose, and doesn't want to transition into that until its dear friend's setup is done. That transition happens by spiritually uttering the bridge's final words through these kids' literal actions when they come across the river.
Across the river and find the world below. Welcome to the playground. Follow me and tell me I know.
Welcome to the Playground is about Zaun, further contextualizing from that greater Arcane theme what this side of the river is all about. And what does the bridge say about Zaun? Zaun is about home and foundation. It's about the way shared bonds form by enduring struggle together. It's about loyalty.
You folks need anything?
It's about community.
A bit of advice. Don't threaten the guy who pours the drinks.
It's about responsibility.
How about you just give Huck the rest of what you owe him?
It's about family.
Welcome to the lanes.
And again, we can look at Welcome to the Playground in terms of welcoming, showing the audience what this side of the river, this side of the coin is like. But the real interesting stuff isn't in playing with the word welcome, but playground. It's an excellent metaphor for the criticisms Arcane subjects its protagonists and their side of the river to.
Let's talk sociology. I am a very serious person. Playgrounds are important communal spaces where families get to let their children play, exercise their little bodies, and learn how to navigate the world.
But they also get to interact with others, learning valuable interpersonal skills along with the dynamics and boundaries of acceptable behavior.
Did you even stop to think about what could have happened to you?
And this episode focuses heavily on the dynamic of Violet's gang of kiddos and Vander's parenting.
I also told you time and time again the North Side's off limits. You want to be treated like adults, right? Then you should know better than to come back from a job empty-handed.
And Vander's effort to parent his kids consistently runs into conflict with them emulating who he otherwise is.
You're the one who always says we have to earn our place in this world. When did you get so comfortable living in someone else's shadow? Besides, this is exactly the sort of job Vander would have pulled when he was our age.
They're growing up, Vander. Looking to write their own stories. You can't protect them forever.
Vander, as a father, is struggling against who he was before he became a father, someone who, we'll discover, was a revolutionary who was willing to fight for a better future for his community.
There's worse things than enforcers out there.
And we should also hammer the point, this world is not a playground. It is not safe. It is dangerous. There's something to be said about the absence of playgrounds in Zaun and the consequences of having no free, safe places for a community. Among other things, it encourages, if not forces people to play where they should not. Despite clear and present danger, everyone, including Vander, operates with this cavalier, devil-may-care attitude.
You think my head is thick?
Just past the average.
Seeing as I'm the only one who knows how to pick locks, I'd suggest...
It's like it's all a game. Like they're kids playing in a playground.
Animals.
Like this entire world is a giant jungle gym, and they're always one slip away from things ending very, very badly. There is no safety in the underground, and forces exist to actively exploit that. To be fair to Vander, he is clearly trying his best, and in this world, he is probably the best dad you could have. But that's not enough. Vander's change of heart to be a more noble and reasonable man may prevent more kids from losing their parents, but it does not solve the problems that Zaun is rife with. Likewise, these kids are learning to be like him in whole, the good and the bad. Violet in particular seems to be influenced by his willingness to protect people with dishonesty and martyrdom.
You can't protect them forever.
Should we show Vander?
No. Let's keep this our little secret.
Zaun is described in terms of homes of stone, and thematically we see the setup of sincere, loving families with solidly built relationships that nevertheless suffer the consequences of their broken foundations. And as long as the foundations of a community are built on poverty and inequality, injustice and exploitation, enforced and perpetuated by an imbalance of power, conflict and violence are inevitable. Appeals to reason and abstaining from that violence can only take you so far.
I want Powder to have more than that, and I'm willing to fight for it.
Episode 2, Some Mysteries Are Better Left Unsolved, also has a fun layering of meanings. It serves to contextualize the other side of the river, Piltover, by mirroring the inciting incident from the point of view of Himbo Fly the Science Guy Jace. The title is uttered pretty early in the episode, as Piltover's de facto leader Heimerdinger grills Jace on why he had these magic boom boom crystals to begin with, but it does so with a convoluted paraphrasing.
All my life I've pursued the mysteries of science, only to discover some are better left unsolved.
Again, there is a simple and direct interpretation here.
We look out for each other. It's the way it's always been. This will blow over.
If Topside had left the mystery of the penthouse heist alone, the situation in Zon may not have escalated.
This mention of magic has the people afraid. The culprits must be apprehended.
If Jace had accepted that his research, trying to sciencify magic, was both dangerous and, illegal, then he wouldn't have risked exile, and the story maybe wouldn't have unfolded as it eventually does. But of course, there's more to it than that.
Where Zon is about the solid foundation of home, Piltover is about the heights towers can be built up to.
We raised almighty towers.
It's about the limitless capacity for humanity's progress. It's about logic, reason, the striving for excellence. It's about awe.
You've no idea how beautiful it is.
It's about ideals.
Surely we, the pioneers of science, can use it for good.
It's about ambition.
A little danger is worth the risk, don't you think?
It's about principle.
No great science should ever put lives in danger.
Piltover couches its passions for development and prosperity in principles that make up its constitutional ethos, towers of virtue like righteousness, benevolence, and industry. Greatest of these is temperance.
You reminded me of myself, a scientist. But sometimes we venture too far.
Heimerdinger is the head of the council, and also the dean of the academy, which, for all intents and purposes, are the same thing. The ivory tower, if you will.
It makes sense that Heimer would be principally concerned with caution.
If you were a scientist, you'd know you can't make a prototype without breaking a few wrenches.
But it's clear his virtues stem from darker traumas.
I've seen this power in the wrong hands. It corrupts, consumes, lays waste to civilizations.
Traumas that are embedded in Piltover's founding mythos and ethos.
Piltover was founded to escape the warmongering of mages.
These virtues are indeed good in isolation, but just like the episode before, Mysteries Unsolved is as much establishment as it is criticism.
Marcus gets a bad rep, not least because Arcane goes out of its way to establish him as a kind of duder antagonist.
You're just a small man in a little hole the world forgot to bury. And I'm gonna bury the lot of you.
But Marcus isn't a generic bad guy. He is a concentrated expression of Piltover's ethos. When he antagonizes Zonites, he does it from a genuine place of principle.
But we all know there is a crime behind every coin that passes through this place.
He's not exactly wrong. He's the sheriff's understudy for a reason. Diligent, undeterrable, and righteous. And while the worst of his qualities may be endemic to his character,
you people down here are all the same.
They are engendered and spurred by the highest positions from literally the tallest tower of his society, before the Hex Gate is built, at least.
We've conducted exhaustive interrogations.
Where are you going with this?
Wherever I goddamn like. Don't you think we've pushed them hard enough?
Do whatever it takes. Turn the Undercity upside down if you have to. Just fight them.
Notice that although Marcus has already met Silco by this point, he didn't utilize him until this council scene when he was told to do anything to get this resolved. And working with the Undercity is a tactic he learns from Sheriff Grayson. Marcus's sin and the council's is a lack of temperance. And where is temperance?
There. Come tomorrow morning, his research will be safely disposed of.
In contrast to Marcus, Heimerdinger is treated like a martyr. His sound appeals to precaution are disregarded, foreshadowing his ousting and Piltover's downfall. But Arcane criticizes Heimer even harder than Marcus. It does it with this episode's very first lines.
You really went to the Undercity to get these?
A little danger is worth the risk, don't you think?
Jace is enamored with magic's potential good, what it can contribute to progress. But Heimer only fears it, and fear is the operative word. Heimer and the Council don't denounce magic out of tempered caution, but reactionary threat.
The Arcane is dangerous, Jace. force of nature. Science cannot control it.
It isn't that magic is inherently or inevitably destructive. The source of its danger is that it cannot be controlled. And Piltover spends a great deal of effort controlling and punishing people rather than listening to them, mistaking that for safety.
I could have you arrested.
You guys really like to bandy that threat around.
We know Heimer's fear of magic stems from a very real apocalyptic trauma, but Heimer's absolutism prevents him from even hearing out Jace's own traumas, and how magic saving him and his mother inspires him to draw opposing conclusions. Heimer's myopia is mirrored in the Council as a whole, as its varying degrees of sincere governance conflicts with self-interest. They are more concerned with maintaining their theoretically good rule, and profit, than seeking ways to rule better, progressing. Piltover prioritizes the authority of its principles, power and control, over the people the principles are intended to benefit. In Piltover, towers are raised mighty, but the higher the tower, the further you are from those beneath you. Towers are inherently unstable, begging to be toppled, and catastrophic when they fall. The episode title, Some Mysteries Are Better Left Unsolved, is less about whether or not this is true, if some mysteries are better left unsolved, but the why. The motivations behind preventing the pursuit of knowledge and action itself, the ethics of control, and the way it, in itself, is often an abuse of power. I want to circle back to titles and meanings, as this episode is the first and one of the few times that Arcane actually references, well, the Arcane.
The Arcane is the curse of our world. My race was nearly destroyed by it.
Literally, in the narrative, the Arcane is magic. It can be anything from restoration to destruction to transportation.
Together, the magic of the five mana can harmonize mankind or become the most powerful destructive force capable of ripping apart the universe.
The word arcane loosely means secret. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines arcane as, but I find the etymology interestingly on topic, ultimately deriving from Latin's arca, a chest, and arcere, to close or shut up. Note the connotation. It's not about what's inside, but about keeping it locked up. It's the contents of Pandora's box, a tantalizing unknown, which, when unleashed, brings an unpredictable, unknowable change. In this vein, thematically, we see that the Arcane, this story, is at its core about both power and change. It's interested in the ethics of both, particularly in the reality that power and change can be inherently dangerous things, but also inevitable, and that trying to prevent change through abuse of power is not only futile, but only creates pressure, adjusting the base circumstances necessary for that change, which only makes it that more catastrophic when it finally occurs. Hence, Episode 3, the base violence necessary for change. Episode 3 heavily features Arcane's use of parallel and symmetry in events to discuss its themes. Although it's largely from the point of view of the protagonists on both sides of the river, Violet and Powder for Zaun, Jace and Victor for Piltover, I argue it's entirely about its villains, Silco and Mel, the architects of that change and their subversive power as manipulators, to get our protagonists to pay change's cost. Silco's opening is an incredible statement about the why people pursue power at any cost to effect change.
Ever wonder what it's like to drown? Story of opposites.
That great arcane theme operates on ideas of entrapment, hopelessness, subjugation. It tells us it does not matter your merits and deserts.
How can anyone have so much stuff?
Simple. Just get born lucky.
It does not matter your society's intentions or ideals.
Let me prove— Enough! You don't understand what's at stake.
Oppression is an enveloping force with no face, no motive, no reason. It just is. And it may be tempting to understand Arcane's tragedy as just this. When you are oppressed, all you can do is realize it, accept it, and despair.
There's peace in water, like it's holding you, whispering in low tones to let it in.
But that is not Arcane's point.
But then, there's this thing in your head, and it's raging.
While it does show how oppression is damning, Arcane is not telling you that it is insurmountable, absolute, or impossible to overcome. It's telling you the opposite: to fight, to survive. It's humanity's nature to persevere, to adapt, to evolve. When faced with injustice, we endeavor for change, however we might achieve it. This is the Arcane tragedy. Not the conditions of a broken societal system, not the symptoms of oppression, but its consequences. The more people are constrained and denied their fulfillment, the more systems, regardless of intentions, tighten the grip of security to keep things safely the same. All the more pressurized, all the more extreme, all the more violent the means to overcome and effect that change. Hence, Silco. Hence, the episode title.
The base violence necessary for change.
Episode 3 is about revolution, and Silco is capital R revolution, not
united forever in friendship and labor,
but
a dream of freedom, not just for the lanes, but the whole of the underground, united as one. The nation of Zorn.
Arcane frames this with fervent zeal to highlight his fanaticism, but Silco isn't a supreme leader prototype. He's not really interested in self-aggrandizement or superficial gains. His motivation is, sincerely, the plight of his people.
You'll get people killed. For what? Pride?
For respect. Opportunity. Everything they've denied us.
And overthrowing their oppressors. Reframed by the anguish of the protagonists, it's easy to sympathize.
I grew up knowing I'm less than them, that my place is down there. I want Powder to have more than that, and I'm willing to fight for it.
Silco is championing very real human needs: esteem, liberty, prosperity, even just hope. Arcane is not lionizing Silco or his methods. It is not subtle at all. He is a monster.
Beautiful, aren't they?
They're monsters.
But it's not really about the morality. It's about the extremes you're driven to overcome oppression.
There's a monster inside all of us.
Arcane is not telling us that we need to become Silco. It cautions that in such a system, inevitably someone will. And to some people who purport a certain cultural mindset about victimhood mentality and anyone can overcome anything and achieve success if you put your mind to it, Arcane agrees and provides context.
Power. Real power doesn't come to those who are born strongest, or fastest, or smartest. No, it comes to those who will do anything to achieve it.
Mel is an interesting contrast to Silco. She too is a character principally interested in revolution. Lowercase r.
If I need something revolutionary, Laura. Something to put Piltover on the map.
Like Silco, she is framed as manipulative, unscrupulous, even ruthless. Late in the series, it's contextualized that she also comes from a complicated background involving family trauma.
A wolf has no mercy.
Where Silco's motivations are from the view of the oppressed, Mel's are from the view of the oppressor, the colonizer, and the establishment, all tinged in Piltover's idealistic capitalist views.
They insist business is steady.
Steady is stagnant, Allura.
And all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you!
But she, too, has a sincere desire to better the lives of her people. She is measured, tactical, and considerate in the methods she takes to accomplish this goal, but she is willing to do anything to achieve her aims. Thus far, all this is set up. Arcane, at this point, has been criticizing motifs and ideals and proposing questions that arise from it. How do we survive and overcome oppression without risking what we would fight for? Do we give up violence when the oppressor is not moved by reason or pacifism? What can the impoverished do against the influence of wealth and politics? What is the balance between allowing socially fraught ideas or experiments and the risk or threats of the unknown outcomes or known social upheaval? How do we connect, bridge between people when a divide has been manufactured and is constantly widened with injury? Is violence ever the answer? Sometimes must it be used anyways? At the climax of this arc, Silco has murdered Benzo and Grayson, kidnapped Vander, and put Violet's gang of kiddos in the position that they need to risk their lives to save him. Mel has enabled Jason Victor to salvage his magic research and perform an experiment in the Ivory Tower itself. If they fail, they'll be exiled, but if they succeed, Pandora's box opens and who knows what then. So we have the setup of metaphors that are paralleled by characters on opposite sides of the river. We now need to see what happens and what answers we glean from their symmetry. So let's examine that parallel by roles. The protagonists, insider and outsider, the mentor whose better judgment the protagonists go against, and the villain manipulating the situation to begin with. The first thing that strikes me is that last role. The villain has to sacrifice something to get what they want, the base violence necessary for change. And that base violence, that sacrifice, betrays the theme of their side of the river. Silco, who is an extremist for his people and wants to elevate his community for its own sake with a cause of nationhood, has to sacrifice the spiritual core of that community. Family, the current leader, Team Dad Vander, and the next generation, sacrificed for power. Mel, who wants to elevate Piltover in its perpetual march of progress, sacrifices the core of the ideals it was founded on. Principle, safety against the chaos of magic and its potential destruction, sacrificed for change. And spoilers, these sacrifices transform their side of the river for the worse. Silco's Zahn, after sacrificing family, turns it ruthless, cannibalizing, self-destructive. Mel's Piltover, after sacrificing principle, turns it into an unstable powerhouse, literally erecting a monument of greed, looming over their ethos's ivory tower, eyed with jealousy and toppling from within. Jace and Victor, the Pilty protagonists, become closer through their success and their dreams come true. Violet and Powder, the Zaunite protagonists, break apart entirely, creating their worst nightmares. And there is something that can be said about broader themes about what these sides of the river actually represent, the haves and the have-nots, the American dream versus the American reality, but I want to hold off on that, because, see, we kind of ran into a hitch. Jace and Victor represent their ideal through unity. Victor embodies the Zahn he came from. He betrays Heimer, who represents a distant, stagnant council, for Jace, who's bettering people's lives. The community Victor values over principle. Victor, who had to overcome prejudice, poverty, and disability, sacrifices all he has gained for Jace, even his cane, symbolizing the full risk of the fall he would take by putting his trust in Jace instead. And all the Cybro fangirls out there thinking saxophone because,
wait a minute, what is my bedroom?
Meanwhile, I'm all Titanic over the cane. Anyways, but for all Victor's virtues, he lacks the vision to use their invention. He can't make progress happen alone. He needs Jace for that. Jace's passion, Jace's intuition, Jace's dreams. It's a beautiful symbolism for what Zahn and Piltover could be if they were sincerely united as equal partners, as one. A mighty tower over a foundation of solid stone. Things only really go bad by the end because the boomer president and the CEO special interest avatar pull the inventor away from his wholesome heterosexual life partner into politics. Tale old as time. In this moment, the resolution is that the best of these two sides come together to make progress. And it's beautiful. Now kiss. In contrast to this, we have Violet and Powder, who, well, it starts to go wrong when Violet tells Powder she can't join the crew in saving Team Dad Vander, and it was nigh perfect, drawing up myriad complex topics, feelings, and themes, all wrapped in some of the most beautiful animation I had ever seen, only for the last 10 seconds of it to end jarringly. Fanboying over. Time to criticize the shit out of this, huh? Okay, so the problem with this scene, I hate it. Okay, I don't hate it. Look, Violet and Powder do wind up representing the core elements of their individual sides of the river. Where Victor is the outsider representing Zaun in Piltover, Violet is the outsider representing Piltover in Zaun, the side that she ultimately winds up on. And this is emblematic in her behavior. Her idealization of family leads her to emulate her father figure, team daddying Powder partly in principle in telling her to stay put. Violet's choices ultimately stem from and exert fear and control.
I need you to sit this one out, Powder. You're not coming. You're not ready. I can't lose you.
Ordering Powder to stay put both out of the fear of the unknown that she represents and out of fear of losing Powder herself. Powder, in contrast, embodies the Zaunite core elements centered on family, tragically emulating her own parental figure, Violet.
But families stick together, you said it yourself.
But you're the one who always says we have to earn our place in this world.
She's coming from a position of loyalty, and Violet's grounding her is a deep betrayal. Powder's motivations are solely to help. Thematically, as a member of the community, it's her obligation to help.
I can help them.
When she sees that Violet et al. Are in danger, Powder uses the only power she has to try and solve the problem, the magic crystals that go boom, and in so doing, gets everyone except Violet killed. Violet lashes out against Powder, punishes her instead of understanding her, extricates herself from the situation, and in so doing, leaves Powder vulnerable, until she is saved, taken against her will, by the most extreme embodiment of Piltover, Marcus. From Powder's perspective, she's been abandoned, and so she falls into the only community, the only family she has left in the underground, Zaun's most extreme embodiment, Silco, who takes her into his embrace. This is arguably fine, but you can make an argument in terms of that greater Arcane theme about power and change, oppression and revolution, those cycles of violence, where Jace and Victor worked together to make their dreams come true. Violet left Powder twice, and that dooms them. But you can also make an argument that Powder's desperate use of the crystals, the absolutely reckless unleashing of power in the form of unrestrained violence, only perpetuates it through its disastrous consequences, engendering an insurmountable animosity between herself and her sister. But you could say it's intended to evoke that dear friend across the river theme, as an amelioration of it is played while Powder is thrown by the explosion. I've emphasized the music's importance, especially in direction by Christian Linke, and Arcane has done this before. In episode 1, when Violet's gang fights the rival gang of Sump Snipes, Powder freezes, and Strings with Ambience somberly plays the bridge's motif. Symbolically, the motif seems to be evocative of violence itself, and Powder is both afraid of it and fascinated in observing it unfold around her. When Powder tries to save Violet et al. With the magic boom crystals and is then thrown by the resulting explosion, she is suspended in air, paralleling the scene that took place just before this with Jace and Victor, and an amelioration of the bridge plays again. But this time, instead of whimpering melancholic, it's filled with this disturbed awe, as though Powder has embraced violence and all of its horror, and everything that follows is its dark consequences. But there's this little problem, this little hitch, this little issue, and that, no! None of that actually makes sense, because none of that is actually what's happening in any of these scenes. On several levels, that is not what is happening in any of these scenes. While episode 3 is absolutely emotionally devastating, it is also an incoherent, messy, absolutely massive clusterfuck of ideas. And after watching season 2, that feels incredibly apt. It is, again, really difficult to explain because there are so many facets, several of which do give the veneer of coherency, and so it begs the question, is the problem really Arcane, or is it just you, as in me? And after watching season 2, I have been feeling more and more vindicated by season 2, is all I'm going to fucking say. I said I wouldn't do it. Is it just me? No! The truth is, if you're at all aware of what has been happening in the story thus far, then you are also aware that there is a significant, complex, and fundamental failure happening here. A failure that is emblematic of all other issues that permeate throughout Season 1. And that failure we can boil down to 3 general issues. 1. The narrative and thematic elements that we can fridge logic into being in play, and probably were meant to actually be in play, don't actually get discussed by the events in the story. They are there, but they do not connect, and so they wind up being distractions, red herrings, and ultimately meaningless window dressing. 2. Additional elements just get slapped on top of the others in a desperate attempt to try and create the veneer of something deep and profound being discussed by the sheer volume of thematic elements at play. But these two have nothing to do with anything, and so they ultimately also wind up just being meaningless spectacle. 3. The reason for the sudden incongruence between narrative and themes and the additional tacking on of additional elements in order to hide the gaps is because, from conception, this scene was never meant to be about any of these themes. The ending of episode 3 is not about what Arcane has been talking about thus far. It is about what Arcane is really all about, the conceit for this show's very existence. Why these 2 League of Legends characters, Vi and Jinx, wind up trying to kill each other all the time. This scene is written with and for the foregone conclusion that these 2 sisters will wind up having an eternal blood feud where they spend the rest of their lives trying to kill each other. And for some reason, instead of making that blood feud, relevant to the rest of the story's themes that it has been painstakingly setting up thus far, it instead focuses on the emotional payoff of achieving that tragic end state, either because it thinks that it is somehow inherently deep enough on its own, which it is not, or because it thinks that it does not need to be. In which case, what the fuck was the point of the rest of this shit? So, specifics. The greater overarching theme of Dear Friend Across the River is evoked during this scene by the amelioration of the bridge's leitmotif. But this scene is not in conversation with Dear Friend because it has nothing to do with people on opposite sides of the river. It doesn't function with Jason Victor really in any way. Jason Victor's big thematic message is about bringing the best qualities of both sides of the river together and overcoming through the power of that unity the systems of oppression that restricts change. Parallel to this, yes, there is room for discussion about how Violet's actions and betrayal do lead to the eventual final end state between the sisters being one of division, conflict, and strife. Sort of. The girls do seem to embody the worst aspects of both sides of the river. Violet using principle to justify using control out of fear. Powder being inherently broken because of the foundations she was built on. But these metaphors fail because A. The concluding state of division between the sisters is not caused by their actual actions but by contrivance, and so is not really in discussion with anything because it's never really earned. B. The results don't actually have anything to say about those thematic elements either individually or in conversation with each other, at least not in a way that Steven Universe hasn't already done better. And C, it doesn't actually say anything about unity at all because Violet was right. Violet did not need Powder. She and her crew solved the problem entirely by themselves. Powder's involvement did cause everything to go wrong, and she did get everybody killed. Powder is a Jinx. And what does that say thematically exactly? Nothing, because saying something was not the point. This is not about cycles of violence. Powder does not choose violence at all. Out of duress, she takes a drastic action that nevertheless has incredibly disproportionate consequences for what she was intending, which is a contrivance and does not say anything, because saying something was not the point. It doesn't have anything to do with the thematic discussion of power itself, except in the strictest sense that Powder uses what little power she has to do something. And yeah, that does go somewhere, and no, it is not good. But in this moment, it is just Powder trying to use a gadget to help. And Arcane just doesn't give enough connective tissue for it to have any more meaning than that. And that's intentional because it's not about saying anything about any of those things. It's not about saying anything. It's about angst. Violet and Powder's events do not translate to any established themes because it is about cementing their own theme. Violet and Powder's ending were not written with any of the heretofore established themes in mind. They were written with the awareness that the central device of this story is the conflict that eventually defines them. And they were written with a commitment to achieve that necessary hatred, not with the themes that they had been building up to interrogate, but one evocative of melodrama and angst. There is a theme that gets slapped on top of all of this that tries to make Vi and Jinx eventually about something. But other than a few probably fridge logic exceptions, it's a massive departure of everything Arcane is talking about thus far, where the title of this very show, The Arcane, is a metaphor about power, and all other themes connect in some way to a conversation about this theme. Vi and Jinx are not about power, and really have nothing to do with it. Their theme is central to only them, and if we're being real, only really to Jinx herself. And here in episode 3, even though they try to shoehorn cinematic and even musical elements that are evocative of those established big ideas in the successful scenes that precede it, this does not work. Because it's not about any of that garbage. It's about reaching a predetermined narrative destination, and along the way, making you feel good with how much you feel bad. Now, I think it's fair to argue, narratively, scenes don't have to work. There is value in spectacle. Beauty can be beautiful for its own sake. Does it not that it make you cry, make it meaningful within itself? I mean, with the amount of effort that Arcane put as I knock over my coffee. It's God telling me that he likes Arcane. I mean, with the amount of effort that Arcane puts into setting up its parallels and themes, and the way that it asks us to take it seriously, yeah, I would expect that its central device also be focused on those themes. An important focus, in fact. The central focus, even. Fuck. But for what it's worth, although objectively episode 3's ending struggles in terms of coherency, that does not necessarily make it bad. It could, in fact, lead somewhere equally as important, profound, and/or emotionally fulfilling as the rest of the series has been thus far. The question lies in what does Arcane do with all of this? And more importantly, does it do it well? And that is its whole damn own thing. Vi and Jinx are, of course, an important part of Arcane, and discussing them requires us contextualizing the other problems of Arcane first. Because, spoilers, no, Arcane does not do it well. And this is the problem with Arcane, Vi and Jinx. And to understand just how much it does not do it well, we have to discuss all this other junk first. Cause everybody wants to be my enemy.